In the just 3 episodes of my How Songs Are Made podcast that I've done so far, every guest has detailed their pre-production process and emphasized how important it is.
We make sure that we can play it to the point where it's muscle memory before ever setting foot in the studio.
For how nitpicky I am with our pre-production.
And it also helps doing pre-pro.
This one, we're like, let's go 100% with pre-production, demo everything out really clearly.
I really think that this is something that every band really needs to know about. So today I'm going to talk about what pre-pro is, why it's so important and why you really need to care about it, and what you actually need to do it right. Everything that I'm going to cover in this video is what you do after you've already written your songs. If you want to learn more about writing songs, you're going to want to check out my new course, Complete Rock and Metal Songwriting. There's a link in the description where you can find out more about that. First, let's talk about what pre-pro is. In short, it's everything that you need to do to prepare before you go to the studio to track your song or your album. More specifically, it's the song or album or EP or whatever you're actually going in to record, completely recorded already with all of the parts and all of the prep that you need to do to be able to perform those parts in the studio. Your pre-pro recordings should basically be identical to the final product, except that they're going to be demo quality. Pre-pro is not the same as a demo. I view a recording as basically existing in 4 different stages. You've got your sort of proof of concept for songwriting, which is anything from like a voice memo on your phone of the seed of an idea, up to a like kind of decent demo recording, but mostly just sort of taking notes to get the ideas down to hear if they're going to work. And then a pretty well fleshed out demo that sounds basically like you want it to. And then pre-pro, which is the final, all the decisions are made, everything is in there, completely fleshed out, all your harmonies and production elements like keyboard synthesizers, whatever, lyrics, melodies, everything as it's going to be. Basically the final product, just not recorded that well, and then the actual final tracking of the song. So why do you need to care about it so much? Number one, it is going to save you literally thousands of dollars. Over the course of recording a whole album, you could save $10,000 just because your pre-production is really dialed in. Number two, it's gonna save a ton of headache for everyone involved in the process. Yourself, the band, the producer, the engineer, any additional musicians you have coming in to track parts. It gets everybody on the same page, and it eliminates tons of nasty little surprises that will cost you a lot of money in the studio. Number three, it allows you to be more productive and creative in the studio while you're recording, rather than just rushing to finish all of the parts. There's nothing like seeing the clock run out on a session when you just have to get it done. You want the producer to be able to say things like, cool, maybe try it with a little bit more vibrato, or how about you hit the drums a little bit harder, or this part was slightly out of time, and not just like, okay, you hit the part, let's move on, let's get the next part, we just gotta get it done. Studio time is extraordinarily expensive, especially at really good studios, which is where you wanna wind up, right? There are so many things that you can do at home for free that you'll have to spend $100+ an hour at the studio to do. So what is pre-pro actually for? You need it for guide tracks, so you're basically recording what you're gonna record in the studio, and then you have them all in the session, and you pretty much just go through and replace everything that you recorded in pre-pro, and that keeps everything a lot more organized and lets you know exactly what it is that you actually need to do. It makes it really easy for the engineer to set up the session on the spot. Building tempo maps on studio time is an expensive nightmare. If you're working with a producer, it allows them to hear the song before it gets expensive for them to suggest changes. And then lastly, it allows you to know what it's actually going to take to track it. You're gonna have an idea of how long it'll take you to record all of the parts for each instrument so that you can plot out how many days that you're gonna need in the studio. And now finally, I'm gonna give you a checklist of all the things that you're gonna need to actually do to achieve this. First of all, you have to have all the parts for all the songs completely recorded. They don't have to be great, they have to be enough so that you can really hear what's going on and that everybody knows what it is that they need to do. It's okay if the drums and the bass are programmed, almost if everything's programmed really, except that you're actually playing those on the demo part, then you'll know that you can actually play them, and actually recording it for pre-pro lets you know that it can be done and what you actually need to do it. So that's ideal if you can. Number 2, this is technically included in the first part, but I'm having it as a second bullet point because it's so important and people forget about it all the time. And that's to have all of your vocal harmonies dialed in before you get there, all written out exactly how you want them to be, because this is something that people forget about a lot, and it's another thing that you get to the studio and the producer's like, okay, so what's the harmony that goes here? And you're like, I don't know, do you have any ideas? And there goes more money. Number 3, that all of your lyrics are written already. Don't let the singer wait until the last minute or until they're standing in the booth to write the lyrics. Oh my God, I can't believe that I need to say that, but it legitimately happens all the time. I embarrassingly have done this. And nobody's happy about it, nobody. Number 4, that everyone has practiced their parts to the click until they are second nature, to the point where you can bust it out anytime, and every take is going to be as close to perfect as makes any difference. Number 5, having your tempo maps exported for all of the songs and ready to go. If you think that you're gonna be able to show up with the session files from your DAW and that the studio is going to magically just be using the same DAW that you have, you're in for a bad time, friend. I am telling you this also from terrible personal experience. You don't want to be like, of course they'll have Reaper at the studio. It's a professional recording studio. They have everything. And you're going to get there and the engineer's going to be like, what am I supposed to do with these? So you export your tempo maps, which will include all of the time signature changes and everything as MIDI, and then they'll be able to import that into any DAW, bing, bang, boom, and you're on your way. You're also just gonna export all of the MIDI from the session, all the instruments and everything, even though you probably won't end up using it, but having it there has saved my hide more than once. Number 6, you're gonna have everything exported from your DAW as WAV files so that you can import them into the session when you get to the studio. You can either do this as stems or as individual tracks, depending on what instrument it is. Normally, you don't want to export the drums as individual tracks for pre-pro because that's kind of overkill. You're not going to need that since you're just going to be replacing it all at once. So you're probably going to just export the drums as a stereo file, and then pretty much everything else is going to be individual files if possible, because then you can just go through and replace each one as you go. I'll also recommend that you export rough versions of the entire track with the click embedded in it, just so that you have something as a reference as you're going, because sometimes you'll be sitting there recording and you're like, something sounds weird or different. This doesn't feel like the right feel or tempo or whatever. And if you've got the rough cut of it that sounds exactly like it did at home, all in one track right there to reference, you can just unmute it and check against the original, then you'll be able to figure out what's going wrong pretty quickly. Number 7, if you have really specific sounds, sound effects, any real particular complicated things that you did on the demo, print those and add them to the session, because I can tell you for sure that it's pretty unlikely that whatever super wacky thing that you did with like complicated routing and a bunch of different plugins and weird effects, they're not gonna have all of that at the studio that you're going to. And if you try and reproduce all of that on the spot at the studio, it's probably not going to work, and you're gonna wind up using the thing that you did at home anyways. Just print them to audio and add that to the session folder. Number 8 is vocal guide tracks. This is something that I recommend for a number of reasons if you can do it, and it can either be just pure MIDI or some kind of a synthesizer or like an oboe. I like to use an oboe, some kind of instrument, a placeholder, so that you can hear the melodies exactly as they are with perfect pitch, rather than having to rely on the demo vocals. And then also when the engineer goes to pitch correct any of the tracks, they'll know what notes they're actually correcting them to, because more times than I can count, I've gotten back a pitch corrected vocal and been like, that is not the right note. What made you think that that was the right note? And then you gotta send it back with a bunch of notes. If you use a guide track of some kind, first of all, the singer might be able to sing it more on pitch because they can hear what it's supposed to be in real time, which might eliminate the need for pitch correction at all, or at least a lot of it, and it gives an engineer a guide of what the melody actually is supposed to be. Number 9, keyboards, orchestration, samples, anything that's in the box that's programmed or recorded direct like a synth, I would just assume that you're going to use those as the final tracks and not record all of that at the studio. It really depends, but most of that stuff is gonna sound just as good at home as it will recording it at a studio. If it's inside the box and you're using your own sample libraries, or if you're using even a hardware synth or keyboard of some kind, that's not really going to sound any different if you track it at a studio. So I do all of that stuff at home and it sounds exactly the same. So print all of that and add it to the session folder as if it's going to be the final thing. It's possible that you might, there might be some specific keyboard that's at the studio that you're gonna wanna use or whatever and replace some of those sounds, but it's pretty likely that you will just use what you recorded at home. So I can promise you that if you prepare in the ways that I've outlined here, every part of recording your EP, album, single, whatever, is going to be way better, way more fun, way easier, and way cheaper. So thank you so much for watching. Please be sure to check out my brand new songwriting course, Complete Rock and Metal Songwriting. There's a link in the description where you can get all the information for that. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you real soon.